Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Margaret Walsh, a sharp-witted widow who uncovers her son-in-law's sinister plot to steal her fortune and eliminate her. With cunning and allies, she turns the tables, exposing his betrayal. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly videos uncovering mysteries and truths. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked past 300 a.m., its soft chime swallowed by the oppressive silence of the old house. I, Margaret Walsh, stood frozen at the top of the creaking staircase, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. A faint murmur drifted from the kitchen below, a voice so low it could have been a trick of the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was Brandon, my son-in-law, his words slithering through the shadows like a serpent. "The meds are working perfectly," he whispered into his phone, his voice laced with a chilling satisfaction. "She's confused, disoriented just enough to make it believable. Tomorrow, I'll push for the commitment papers. Once she's locked away Sarah's next and all that money, it's ours." A pause, then a cruel chuckle. "Trust me, no one will suspect a thing. I've planned every detail." My blood turned to ice, my heart hammering so loudly I feared it would betray me. I pressed myself against the wall, the peeling wallpaper rough under my trembling fingers. Brandon's words weren't just a betrayal, they were a death sentence. But in that moment, something stirred deep within me, a spark of defiance honed by years of surviving life's storms alongside my late husband Frank, a detective who taught me to see through lies. I wasn't the frail, forgetful widow Brandon thought me to be. No, I was a woman who knew how to fight back. And by morning, he'd learned just how dangerous underestimating me could be. The nightmare had begun 3 months earlier, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Dr. Morrison, a soft-spoken physician with kind eyes, had prescribed a new blood pressure medication after a routine checkup. "It's standard, Margaret," he'd assured me, adjusting his glasses. "You might feel off for a week or two, dizziness, perhaps some fog, but it'll pass." He wasn't wrong. The first week was a blur of vertigo and disorientation. I'd stumble into furniture, my hands fumbling as I misplaced my coffee mug, or forgot simple tasks like whether I'd locked the front door. It felt like my mind was unraveling thread by fragile thread. That's when Brandon saw his chance. Over dinner that first night, as Sarah, my daughter, pushed her food around her plate, exhausted from her hospital shift, Brandon's voice dripped with false concern. "Margaret's declining fast, Sarah," he said, his eyes flickering toward me cold and calculating, though his tone was warm as honey. "We need to start looking at memory care facilities before it gets worse." I sat at the table, a silent witness to my own erasure, my fork trembling in my hand. Sarah's worried gaze darted between us, her brow furrowed. "Do you really think it's that bad already?" she asked. Her voice small, her hand reaching for mine. "She's been so sharp her whole life." Sarah continued her trust in Brandon, blinding her to the predator sitting across from her. Brandon cut his steak with surgical precision, his smile a mask. "Cognitive decline can hit fast at her age." He said, his words smooth as polished stone. "We can't risk waiting. It's for her safety and ours." I wanted to scream to tell Sarah the truth, but the fog in my mind held me back. Or so I thought then. The medication's side effects faded after 2 weeks, just as Dr. Morrison had predicted. My thoughts cleared, my steps steadied, and I could place my coffee mug without a second thought. But Brandon's campaign against me only grew darker. He began weaving a tapestry of lies, each thread designed to trap me. Margaret left the stove on again. He'd tell Sarah when she dragged herself home from a double shift, her nurse's scrubs stained with the day's battles. I found her wandering the backyard at 2 a.m., He'd claim, though I'd only stepped outside to tend my roses under the moonlight, their scent grounding me in a world that felt increasingly hostile. Sarah, bless her naive heart, believed him. She'd look at me with pity, the kind of look I once gave my own mother before Alzheimer's stole her away. But I wasn't my mother. I wasn't declining. I was watching, listening, and piecing together the puzzle Brandon thought he'd hidden so well. Every night, as the house groaned under the weight of its secrets, I lay awake, my mind racing. I wasn't just a widow living in my daughter's home. I was a survivor trained by Frank to spot the wolves among the sheep. That night, as the clock struck 2:47 a.m., my bladder demanded I brave the stairs. I moved like a ghost, each step calculated to avoid the creaks I'd memorized over years in this house. The kitchen light spilled faintly into the hallway, and Brandon's voice grew clearer, sharper, like a blade being honed. "She's exactly where we need her," he said, his tone smug. "Confused enough to sell the story, but lucid enough to sign the papers if we time it right." My breath caught my body pressed against the wall, as if I could melt into it. "The commitment hearing's set for Thursday," he continued. "Peterson owes me from med school. He'll testify she's a danger to herself and others. Once she's declared incompetent, her finances are mine." A chill ran through me, not just from his words, but from the casual cruelty in his laugh. "Sarah will be devastated, sure, but she'll get over it. No more old lady shuffling around, no more worrying about her next accident. The insurance alone is $2.3 million plus her savings and the house. Frank was smarter with money than anyone knew." My legs nearly buckled. Frank and I had built that nest egg quietly, living modestly to ensure Sarah's future. I'd never told her the extent of it, wanting her to carve her own path. Now Brandon planned to steal it all, and me with it. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end, too faint for me to decipher. "6 months max," he said firmly. "These facilities are notorious for mistakes, medication errors, falls, sudden declines. It'll look tragic, but natural." My vision blurred not from tears, but from rage, a fire kindled by years of love and loss. Brandon wasn't just after my money. He wanted me erased, a footnote in his perfect life. I crept back upstairs, my heart a war drum, my mind alight with purpose. Sleep was impossible. Instead, I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling where Frank and I once dreamed of our future. He'd taught me how predators think methodical, patient, but always arrogant. Brandon's arrogance was my weapon. He thought I was a helpless old woman lost in a fog of her own making. But I was wide awake, and I had less than 36 hours to unravel his web. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. Brandon's morning routine was as predictable as the sunrise coffee news, then a long shower with his insipid financial podcasts. He'd never see me coming. As the first light crept through my window, I whispered to Frank's memory, "This one's for you." The old house seemed to hum in agreement, its walls holding secrets older than Brandon's greed. Today, I'd start building my trap. And by the time he stepped into that shower, he'd find himself caught in a game he never expected to lose. The air in Dr. Morrison's office was thick with the scent of antiseptic and old paper, the kind that clings to medical charts stacked high on his desk. I sat across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the weight of 67 years pressing against my shoulders. It was 3 months before that fateful night when I overheard Brandon's chilling plan, and the world I'd known was still intact, though cracks were forming invisible to everyone but me. Dr. Morrison, his glasses perched precariously on his nose, scribbled on a prescription pad. "Margaret, your blood pressure's been creeping up," he said, his voice gentle but firm. This new medication should stabilize things. You might feel dizzy or foggy for a week or two, but it's temporary. Call me if it persists." I nodded, trusting him as I always had. Frank, my late husband, had taught me to respect expertise, but never to surrender my instincts. A police detective for 25 years, he'd seen too many truths buried under polished lies. As I tucked the prescription into my purse, a faint unease stirred like a whisper from the house itself, urging me to stay sharp. I brushed it off, chalking it up to the ache of living without Frank these past 3 years. But the house, our old Victorian with its creaking floors and shadowed corners, always seemed to know more than I did. The first week on the medication was a descent into chaos. My mind, once as sharp as Frank's case files, felt like it was dissolving into mist. I'd reach for my coffee mug, only to find it missing, then spot it on the counter where I'd never left it. I'd lock the front door, check it twice, then doubt myself an hour later. One morning, I bumped into the kitchen table, the edge bruising my hip, as the room spun like a carousel. Sarah, my daughter, noticed immediately. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked. Her nurse's eyes scanning me with worry as she poured her morning coffee. Her scrubs were wrinkled from a late shift, her face pale with exhaustion. "Just adjusting to the new meds," I said, forcing a smile. "Dr. Morrison warned me about this." Sarah squeezed my hand, her touch warm but fleeting, as she rushed out the door for another 12-hour shift at the hospital. She was my anchor, my only child, with Frank's stubborn heart and my quiet resolve. But her life was a whirlwind of patience and paperwork, leaving little room to notice the storm brewing in her own home. That's when Brandon stepped into the void, his shadow falling over our lives like a fog rolling in and from the lake. My son-in-law was a man of calculated charm, his smile as polished as the cufflinks he wore with his tailored suits. He'd swept Sarah off her feet 5 years ago, a medical school dropout turned financial consultant who spoke of wealth like it was his birthright. I'd never trusted him, not because of anything overt, but because of the way his eyes lingered too long on things that weren't his. Frank would have called it a predator's gaze, and Frank was rarely wrong. That first night, over a dinner of grilled steak and roasted potatoes, Brandon's plan began to take shape. I sat at the head of the table, a place I had claimed since moving in with Sarah after Frank's death. The dining room, with its faded wallpaper and crystal chandelier, felt like a relic of happier times. Sarah was quiet, her fork tracing patterns in her uneaten food, while Brandon leaned forward, his voice smooth as silk. "Sarah, I'm worried about your mom," he said, his tone dripping with concern so practiced it could have been rehearsed. "She's been off lately, forgetting things, stumbling around. I think we need to consider memory care facilities before it gets worse." I froze my fork halfway to my mouth. The words hit like a slap, not because they were true, but because they were so deliberately false. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes darting to me. "Mom's always been sharp," she said, her voice wavering. "It's just the medication, right? You said it's temporary." "It could be," Brandon replied, cutting his steak with a precision that made my skin crawl. "But cognitive decline at her age can escalate quickly. We can't take risks, not with her safety, not with ours." His eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and I saw it a glint of triumph, as if he'd already won a game I didn't know I was playing. I wanted to protest, to tell Sarah the dizziness was fading, that I was still me. But the fog in my head made my words feel slippery, unreliable. So I stayed silent, a spectator in my own life. Sarah reached for my hand, her touch grounding me. "Do you really think it's that serious already?" she asked, her voice small. Brandon's smile was a masterpiece of false empathy. "We need to be proactive, darling. Waiting could put everyone at risk." The word everyone hung in the air, heavy with implication. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a liability, a piece of furniture to be moved or removed. The days that followed were a blur of doubt and disorientation. The medication's grip loosened by the second week, just as Dr. Morrison had promised. My steps grew steady, my thoughts clear like sunlight breaking through clouds. I could find my keys, remember my appointments, even tend my prize roses in the backyard without a second thought. But Brandon's campaign was only beginning. He watched me like a hawk, his notepad always close, jotting down incidents that never happened. Margaret left the stove on again. He'd tell Sarah when she dragged herself home, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. I found her wandering outside at midnight in her nightgown. He'd claim, though I'd only stepped out to check the roses under the moon's glow, their petals whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. Sarah, stretched thin by her hospital shifts, didn't question him. She'd come home to Brandon's reports, his hands massaging her shoulders as he spun tales of my decline. "I'm worried about leaving her alone," he'd say, his voice heavy with a burden he didn't feel. "What if she falls? What if she starts a fire?" Sarah's gaze would shift to me, filled with pity and fear, the kind of look that breaks a mother's heart. I'd seen it before years ago when my own mother's mind began to slip. But I wasn't slipping. I was awake, alert, and increasingly aware of the trap being set around me. The house itself seemed to sense it too. At night, its creaks and groans felt like warnings, as if Frank's spirit lingered in the walls, urging me to pay attention. I'd lie awake, replaying Brandon's words, his too perfect concern, the way his eyes flickered with something darker when he thought I wasn't looking. Frank had taught me to trust my instincts, to see the patterns others missed. And the pattern was clear. Brandon wasn't just exploiting my temporary confusion. He was building a cage, brick by calculated brick. One evening, as I sat in the living room pretending to read a book, while Brandon and Sarah spoke in hushed tones in the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of his true intentions. The chandelier above flickered unprompted, casting jagged shadows across the room. I froze, my pulse quickening, as if the house itself was trying to speak. Brandon's voice drifted through the doorway, low and urgent. "We can't keep her here forever, Sarah," he said. "It's not safe for any of us." Sarah's response was too soft to hear, but I could imagine her nodding her trust in him unshaken. The chandelier flickered again, and I felt a chill not from the room, but from a certainty deep in my bones. Brandon wasn't just planning to send me away. He was planning something far worse. I began to watch him more closely, my senses sharpened by suspicion. His morning routine was a study in self-absorption, coffee brewed in his overpriced machine, financial podcasts droning through his phone, his suits pressed to perfection. But there were moments when his mask slipped a glance at my purse, a lingering pause by the safe in the study, a too quick smile when Sarah mentioned my savings. Frank used to say predators always reveal themselves if you know where to look. And I was looking. By the end of the second week, my mind was my own again. But I kept up the act, fumbling with my glasses, hesitating over small tasks, letting Brandon think his plan was working. I didn't know the full extent of his scheme yet, but I knew enough to be afraid. And fear, as Frank taught me, was just energy waiting to be harnessed. I'd need every ounce of it for what was coming. The house creaked softly, as if in agreement, its shadows pooling around me like allies in the dark. Brandon thought he was hunting me, but he was about to learn that I was no prey. I was Margaret Walsh, widow of a detective keeper of secrets, and a woman who'd fight like hell to protect what was hers. The old Victorian house had always been my sanctuary, its creaking beams and stained glass windows holding memories of laughter with Frank and Sarah's childhood footsteps. But now, as the weeks unfolded after my medication's side effects faded, it felt like a labyrinth closing in around me. Brandon, My son-in-law was no longer just a shadow in our home. He was the architect of a trap, weaving lies with the precision of a spider spinning silk. His campaign to erase me began subtly. A whisper here, a staged incident there. But it grew into something sinister, each move calculated to convince Sarah I was losing my mind. Yet, in the quiet of the night when the house seemed to hum with secrets, I vowed to outwit him. I was Margaret Walsh, widow of a detective, and no one would steal my life without a fight. Brandon's attacks were insidious, cloaked in concern so convincing it could fool anyone who didn't know better. He was a chameleon, his tailored suits and practiced smiles masking the predator beneath. I'd seen men like him before Frank had pointed them out in his case files, their charm a weapon sharper than any blade. But Brandon underestimated me, mistaking my age for weakness, my silence for surrender. Every morning, as he sipped his overpriced coffee and scrolled through financial news, I watched him, my eyes hidden behind the rim of my teacup. I played the part he'd written for me, a confused old woman fumbling through her days while my mind cataloged every word, every glance, every lie. It started with small things designed to plant doubt in Sarah's mind. One evening, as the autumn wind rattled the windows, Sarah stumbled through the front door, her nurse's scrubs clinging to her from a long shift. Brandon was waiting, his face a portrait of worry. Margaret left the stove on again today. He said, his voice heavy with feigned burden as he rubbed Sarah's shoulders. I caught it just in time. We're lucky the house didn't go up in flames. Sarah's eyes widened, darting to me as I sat in the armchair pretending to struggle with a crossword puzzle. Mom, is that true? She asked, her voice trembling with exhaustion and fear. I looked up, letting my expression waver as if confused. I don't think so, dear, I said softly, my voice tinged with uncertainty. I haven't cooked today. But doubt flickered in Sarah's eyes, and I hated myself for feeding it even to protect my plan. Brandon's smile was subtle, a flicker of triumph he thought I didn't see. She's been forgetting things like this a lot, he said, guiding Sarah to the kitchen table. It's getting worse. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that even I almost believed it for a moment. But I hadn't touched the stove. The kitchen was as pristine as I'd left it that morning, the burners cold. Yet Sarah, worn down by her endless shifts, nodded her trust in Brandon unshaken. The incidents multiplied, each one a carefully staged performance. One night, Brandon claimed he'd found me wandering the backyard at 2 a.m., clad only in my nightgown, lost in a fog of my own making. She was muttering to herself. Sarah, he told her over breakfast, his voice low and grave. I had to guide her back inside before she hurt herself. Sarah's fork froze midair, her face pale. Mom, why didn't you tell me? She asked, her eyes searching mine for answers I couldn't give, not yet. I'd been nowhere near the backyard that night. I'd been in my room reading one of Frank's old case journals, the pages smelling faintly of his cologne. But I played along, letting my hands tremble as I reached for my tea. I don't remember, sweetheart, I said, hating the lie, but knowing it kept me safe. The house seemed to protest Brandon's deceit. At night, the floorboards groaned without cause, and the chandelier in the dining room flickered, casting jagged shadows that danced like specters. Once, as Brandon recounted another fabricated incident, something about me leaving the front door unlocked. I swear I saw the curtains shift, as if stirred by an unseen hand. Frank used to say our home had a soul built from the love we poured into it. Now it felt like an ally whispering warnings only I could hear. I began to wonder if Frank's spirit lingered, guiding me through the fog Brandon was trying to create. Sarah was the perfect target for his manipulation, her heart too trusting, her body too tired. She worked brutal hours at the hospital, stitching wounds and soothing grieving families coming home with barely enough energy to eat. Brandon was always there ready with a glass of wine and a litany of my supposed failings. I'm worried about leaving her alone during the day, he'd say, his hands resting on Sarah's shoulders as she slumped in her chair. What if she falls down the stairs? What if she forgets who she is? Each word was a seed planted deep in Sarah's mind, watered by her love for me and her faith in him. I watched her change her glances toward me, shifting from warmth to pity, then to something worse, fear. It was the look I'd once given my mother as Alzheimer's claimed her, and it cut deeper than any knife. Brandon's notebook became his weapon, a small leather-bound journal he carried everywhere, its pages filled with evidence of my decline. He'd scribble notes in front of Sarah, his pen moving with the precision of a surgeon. Margaret misplaced her glasses again, he'd announce, or she asked the same question 3 times today. Lies, all of them. But Sarah didn't question him. She'd nod, her eyes glassy with exhaustion, and I'd feel the walls of my world shrinking. Once I caught a glimpse of his notebook when he left it on the kitchen counter, its pages open to a list of dates and fabricated incidents. September 12th, Margaret left the garage door open all night. Potential security risk. I'd never gone near the garage. The audacity of his lies was breathtaking, but so was his arrogance. He thought I was too far gone to notice, too weak to fight back. Yet I was noticing everything. The way he lingered near the safe in the study, his fingers brushing the lock as if testing its strength. The way he'd ask Sarah about my finances, his questions casual but pointed. "Does your mom have a will?" he'd say, or "What happens to the house if—" Well, you know. Sarah, lost in her grief for the mother she thought I was becoming, didn't see the hunger in his eyes. But I did. Frank had taught me to read people to see the tells they couldn't hide. Brandon's tell was his confidence, the way he moved through our home like a king claiming his castle. He thought he'd already won. The house, though, had other ideas. One night, as I sat in my bedroom, the air grew heavy, the shadows pooling in corners like spilled ink. I was reading Frank's journals again, searching for strength in his words, when a photograph slipped from the pages, a picture of us on our 20th anniversary, laughing under the willow tree in the backyard. As I reached for it, the lamp flickered, and I heard a soft thud from downstairs. Heart pounding, I crept to the landing, peering into the darkness. Brandon was in the study, his silhouette illuminated by the glow of his phone. He was muttering too low to hear, but the safe's door was ajar, its contents untouched but exposed. I retreated before he saw me, my mind racing. Was he planning to steal now, or was he just testing the waters? The house creaked, as if urging me to act, and I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I began to fight back in small ways, testing the boundaries of Brandon's deception. I'd leave my glasses in plain sight, then find them before he could claim I'd lost them. I'd lock the front door with a flourish when he was watching, forcing him to rewrite his narrative. Each act was a quiet rebellion, a reminder that I was still here, still sharp. But I had to be careful. Brandon was no fool. He watched me as closely as I watched him, his eyes narrowing when I spoke too clearly or moved too confidently. Once, as I tended my roses in the twilight, their thorns pricking my fingers, he appeared at the garden gate, his smile cold. "Careful, Margaret," he said. "You don't want to get lost out here." The words were innocent, but his tone was a warning, a promise of what was to come. The roses seemed to bristle in response, their petals catching the fading light like tiny shields. I'd always believed they held a kind of magic planted by Frank and me on our first anniversary. Now they felt like sentinels guarding me against the darkness creeping into our home. I straightened, meeting Brandon's gaze. "I know exactly where I am," I said, my voice steady. His smile faltered just for a moment, and I saw a flicker of doubt. Good. Let him wonder. By the end of the third week, Brandon's campaign had reached a fever pitch. He produced a glossy brochure for Sunset Manor, a memory care facility with cheerful photos of elderly residents painting watercolors and playing bingo. "This could be perfect for you, Margaret," he said one evening, sliding the brochure across the kitchen table. Sarah, her eyes red from a double shift, looked at it with a mix of guilt and relief. "It looks nice," she said, her voice breaking. "Maybe it's for the best." I picked up the brochure, my hands steady, despite the rage burning in my chest. "It's expensive," I said, letting my voice tremble, playing the part he expected. "Don't worry about that," Brandon replied, his tone oily with reassurance. "We'll take care of everything." Everything. The word echoed in my mind, heavy with meaning. I saw the future he'd planned for me: a locked room, a medicated haze, a quiet death disguised as tragedy. But I saw something else, too. Frank's face, his eyes fierce with the determination that had carried him through countless cases. He'd taught me to think like a predator when necessary, to turn their own arrogance against them. Brandon thought he was hunting me, but he was wrong. I was the one setting the trap, and the house was my accomplice, its shadows whispering strategies only I could hear. As I lay in bed that night, the wind howling outside, I felt a surge of strength like a current running through my veins. The house creaked softly, its timbers settling as if in agreement. Brandon's lies were piling up, but so was my resolve. I'd let him think he was winning, let him grow careless in his confidence. But soon, very soon, he'd learn the truth: Margaret Walsh was no one's prey. I was a storm waiting to break, and when it did, Brandon would be the one lost in the fog. The house was alive with secrets that night, its creaking timbers whispering warnings only I seemed to hear. It was 2:47 a.m., and the darkness pressed against my bedroom window like a living thing, the moonlight casting jagged shadows across the floor. I, Margaret Walsh, lay awake, my bladder demanding I brave the stairs, despite the unease coiling in my gut. For weeks, I'd felt the walls of my world closing in, Brandon's lies tightening around me like a noose. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover: a truth so monstrous it would shatter the fragile peace of our home and awaken the fighter Frank had forged within me. I slipped from my bed, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood, each step a calculated dance to avoid the floorboards that groaned like betrayed confidants. The old Victorian house with its stained glass windows and memories of better days had become both my refuge and my battleground. As I reached the landing, a faint glow spilled from the kitchen below, accompanied by a voice low, urgent, and unmistakably Brandon's. It wasn't the first time I'd caught him whispering in the dead of night, but something about his tone tonight sent a shiver down my spine, as if the house itself was urging me to listen. I crept closer, my heart a war drum in my chest, pressing myself against the hallway wall where the shadows cloaked me. The wallpaper, peeling from years of neglect, felt rough under my fingers, grounding me as I strained to hear. Brandon's voice drifted through the darkness, sharp and cold, like a blade slicing through silk. "She's exactly where we need her," he said into his phone, his words dripping with a satisfaction that made my skin crawl. Confused enough to sell the story, but lucid enough to sign the papers if we time it right. The commitment hearings set for Thursday morning. Peterson owes me from med school. He'll testify she's a danger to herself and others. My breath caught my body frozen as the weight of his words sank in. Commitment hearing Thursday. The pieces of Brandon's campaign snapped into place, Each lie he'd told Sarah about the stove, my wandering, my supposed decline building toward this moment. He wasn't just trying to convince Sarah I needed care. He was planning to lock me away, to strip me of my freedom and my life. The house seemed to shudder, a faint creak echoing from the ceiling as if it shared my horror. Brandon's voice continued oblivious to the storm brewing in the shadows. Once she's declared incompetent, I'll petition for power of attorney over her finances. It's foolproof. A pause, then a laugh that sent ice through my veins. Sarah. Poor Sarah will be devastated at first, but she'll get over it. No more old woman shuffling around in her bathrobe. No more worrying about her next accident. The life insurance alone is worth $2.3 million plus her savings and the house. Turns out Frank was smarter with money than anyone will realize. My legs nearly buckled the air, growing heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Frank and I had spent 38 years building that nest egg, living modestly, investing wisely, all to secure Sarah's future. We'd never told her the full extent of it, wanting her to forge her own path, not lean on an inheritance. But Brandon knew. He'd done his homework, his greed, sniffing out every dollar we'd hidden. The chandelier in the dining room flickered faintly, though no one touched the switch, casting eerie shadows that danced like specters across the hallway. I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying my racing heart. Frank's voice echoed in my mind. Listen carefully, Maggie. Predators always reveal themselves if you know when to stay quiet. I stayed quiet, my body pressed against the wall, every nerve alight with dread and determination. Brandon's voice grew sharper, more reckless. 6 months, max, he said firmly. These facilities are notorious for mistakes, medication errors, falls, sudden declines. It'll look tragic, natural. No one will question it. Another pause, the faint murmur of a voice on the other end too soft to decipher. No, she can't linger, he snapped. Too expensive, too risky. If she regains clarity, she could ruin everything. We need her gone quickly, quietly. The word gone hit like a gunshot. This wasn't just about money. Brandon wanted me erased, a nuisance removed from his perfect life. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a rage so fierce it felt like fire in my veins. The house responded, a low groan rippling through the walls, as if Frank's spirit was stirring, urging me to act. I thought of Sarah, my sweet, trusting daughter, working herself to exhaustion while her husband plotted my murder. She was his unwitting accomplice, her love for him, a weapon he wielded without mercy. I wanted to storm into the kitchen to confront him with the fury of a mother betrayed, but Frank's training held me back. Never act on anger alone, he'd say. Anger is energy, direct. It don't let it direct you. I forced myself to breathe, to listen, to gather every shred of evidence. Brandon's arrogance was my advantage. He thought I was asleep, lost in a medicated haze, too frail to fight back. But I was wide awake, and the house was on my side, its shadows cloaking me like armor. He continued, his voice now tinged with excitement, as if savoring his victory. Once Margaret's out of the picture, we can live the life we deserve. That beach house in Florida you keep talking about. It's ours. Travel the world, no burdens, no complications. Sarah's too soft-hearted to commit her mother herself, but once it's done, she'll see it was for the best. The casual cruelty in his words was staggering, each syllable a nail in the coffin he'd built for me. The floorboards creaked softly as if the house was urging me to move to act, but I stayed rooted, memorizing every word. The conversation shifted, Brandon's tone growing conspiratorial. Peterson's already on board. He's drafting the evaluation, now severe cognitive decline, risk of self-harm, the works. Judge Morrison's sympathetic to elder abuse cases. She'll sign off without a second thought. My heart sank. Judge Morrison. Frank had known her, worked with her on cases years ago. Was she part of this, or just another pawn in Brandon's game? The chandelier flickered again, its light pulsing like a heartbeat, and I felt a strange certainty the house knew the truth and it was guiding me toward it. I edged closer to the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the rug, the glow of the light casting Brandon's silhouette against the wall. He stood by the counter, his phone pressed to his ear, his back to me. The safe in the study loomed in my mind, its contents, our savings, our legacy, now a target. Frank had always kept a second safe hidden in the attic, its existence known only to me. Had Brandon found it? The thought sent a jolt of fear through me, but also a spark of defiance. He could have my money, but he'd never have my will. The conversation ended abruptly, Brandon's voice cutting off as he pocketed his phone. I retreated, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he'd hear it. But he didn't. He moved through the kitchen humming a tune that grated like nails on a chalkboard, his steps confident, assured of his victory. I made it back to my bedroom, closing the door softly, my mind racing as I sank onto the bed. The house was silent now, but its presence lingered, a quiet ally in the darkness. Sleep was impossible. I lay staring at the ceiling, Frank's old police badge on the nightstand glinting in the moonlight. The truth was a weight I could barely carry, but it was also a weapon. Brandon wasn't just planning to steal my money, he was planning my murder, using my daughter's trust as his shield. The life insurance policy, the savings, the house. It was all a means to an end, a future where Sarah grieved a mother who'd been erased. But he'd underestimated me, just as he'd underestimated the house. Its creaks, its flickers, its shadows. They weren't random. They were signs, messages from a home that had seen too much to let me fall. I closed my eyes, picturing Frank's face, his steady gaze that always saw through the chaos. Predators make mistakes when they feel untouchable. He told me once, after a case that nearly cost him his life. Brandon felt untouchable, his plan meticulous, his arrogance blinding him to the woman watching from the shadows. I wasn't the confused widow he thought I was. I was Margaret Walsh, forged in love and loss, trained by a detective to think 3 steps ahead. And I had less than 36 hours to turn his trap against him. The house seemed to hum in agreement, a low vibration that pulsed through the walls. I rose from the bed, moving to the window where my roses glowed faintly in the moonlight. They'd been Frank's gift planted on our first anniversary, their thorns a reminder that beauty could protect itself. I touched the glass, feeling their strength mirror my own. Brandon thought he was the hunter, but he was wrong. I was the one stalking him now, guided by the house, by Frank's memory, by a fire that no amount of lies could extinguish. As dawn crept closer, I began to plan. Brandon's routine was my map coffee at 6 News, at 6:30 a 30-minute shower with his insipid podcasts. He'd leave his phone on the counter unguarded, its secrets mine for the taking. I'd need evidence, allies, and time, but I had something he didn't, the truth, and a house that seemed to know it. The shadows shifted, the roses swayed, and I whispered to Frank, wherever he was, "This one's for us." The fight was just beginning, and Brandon was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a woman who's already survived the worst. The darkness of my bedroom was a cocoon, wrapping me in silence as the weight of Brandon's words settled like ash in my lungs. It was past 300 a.m., the house creaking softly as if mourning the betrayal I'd just uncovered. His voice still echoed in my mind. Commitment, hearing power of attorney, 6 months max. Each syllable a brick in the prison he planned to build for me. But I, Margaret Walsh, was no prisoner. 38 years with Frank, a detective who saw through shadows, had taught me to turn fear into fuel. As I lay staring at the ceiling, the moonlight glinting off Frank's old police badge on the nightstand, I felt a fire kindle within me. Brandon thought he was hunting a frail old woman, but he was about to meet a storm. The house seemed to agree, its timbers groaning as if urging me to act. I rose from the bed, my bare feet silent on the hardwood, and moved to the window. My roses glowed faintly in the backyard, their thorns catching the moonlight like tiny blades. They'd been Frank's gift planted on our first anniversary, a symbol of love that could defend itself. Now they felt like allies whispering strength as I began to forge my plan. Brandon's arrogance was my weapon. He thought I was helpless, lost in a medicated fog, but I was wide awake and the clock was ticking. Thursday's commitment hearing was less than 36 hours away. I had to move fast, but I had to move smart. My mind, sharpened by years of listening to Frank dissect cases, broke the challenge into 3 priorities, each as clear as the stars outside. First, I needed evidence, irrefutable proof of Brandon's conspiracy that no judge or jury could dismiss. His phone calls, his texts, his lies, they were the threads of his web, and I'd pull them apart. Second, I needed allies, people untouched by Brandon's charm who could see the truth and stand with me. Sarah, my beloved daughter, was too entangled in his manipulations. But there were others, shadows from Frank's past, who owed him debts deeper than blood. Third, I needed speed. Every hour brought me closer to that hearing, and Brandon was too cunning to leave loose ends. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me, and that would be his undoing. The house pulsed with a strange energy, as if Frank's spirit lingered in its walls, guiding my thoughts. I remembered a case he'd worked years ago, a conman who'd nearly outsmarted the precinct until Frank noticed a single careless detail, a receipt left in a wallet. Predators, he'd said, always slip when they feel untouchable. Brandon felt untouchable, humming his infuriating tune, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter each morning as if no one would dare touch it. That phone was my first target. A vault of secrets waiting to be cracked. I'd watched him enter his passcode dozens of times. His ego is so bloated, he never bothered to hide it. 8/24. His birthday. Men like him always chose themselves. I paced the room, my mind racing as I mapped out the morning. Brandon's routine was as predictable as the Tide's coffee at 6 News at 6:30, a 30-minute shower, with his financial podcasts blaring through a waterproof speaker. He'd leave his phone charging on the counter unguarded while he indulged in his narcissistic rituals. That was my window, a fleeting chance to seize his secrets. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed to protect my assets, the nest egg Frank and I had built hidden in accounts Brandon didn't know existed. And I needed allies, someone who could match his cunning with experience, someone who'd see through his lies as clearly as Frank once did. The roses outside swayed, though no breeze stirred the air, and I felt a chill not of fear, but of certainty. The house was with me, its shadows pooling like sentinels, its creaks a rhythm to my planning. I sat at the small desk in my room, pulling out a notepad I'd kept from Frank's days, its pages yellowed, but sturdy. In his precise handwriting, he'd written, "Trust the evidence, Maggie. It's the only truth that matters." I began to outline my counterattack, each step a brick in the wall I'd build to trap Brandon. Step 1. Evidence. I'd start with his phone photographing the call logs and texts that betrayed his plot with Dr. Peterson. But I had to be careful. Brandon was meticulous, and a single misstep could alert him. I'd need to move silently, my actions cloaked by the role he'd assigned me, the confused widow too frail to suspect. The house seemed to hum in approval, a faint flicker in the lamp casting patterns on the wall, like a map only I could read. I'd also check the safe in the study, ensuring he hadn't tampered with it, and secure the hidden attic safe Frank had installed years ago. Its existence was my secret, a failsafe Brandon couldn't imagine. Step 2, allies. Sarah was compromised, her trust in Brandon a chain I couldn't yet break. But Frank's old partner, Ray Collins, was still out there, a retired detective at 72 sharp, as the day he'd walked a beat with Frank. Ray had a nose for lies and a loyalty to Frank that ran deeper than time. I'd seen him last at Frank's funeral, his eyes fierce with grief, promising to watch over us. He'd know what to do, and he'd know who to call, perhaps even Judge Morrison, whose name Brandon had dropped so carelessly. The chandelier in the dining room flickered again, unprompted, and I smiled. The house was pointing me toward Ray, its shadows aligning like arrows. Step 3, speed. Thursday morning was my deadline, a guillotine poised above my freedom. I had to act before Brandon finalized his plans, before Dr. Peterson's false evaluation sealed my fate. Every move had to be precise, every moment calculated. I'd use Brandon's routine against him, striking when he was most vulnerable, his guard lowered by his own arrogance. The house creaked softly, as if nodding its timbers, settling into a rhythm that matched my resolve. I paused, my pen hovering over the notepad, as a memory surfaced. Frank and I sitting on the porch watching a sunset paint the sky in hues of fire. Maggie, he'd said, his hand warm over mine, the world's full of wolves. But you're tougher than they are. You just have to think like them. I'd laughed then, but now his words were a lifeline. Brandon was a wolf, but I could be one too, stalking him from the shadows he thought he owned. The roses outside swayed again, their petals glowing like embers, and I felt a surge of strength, as if Frank's spirit was woven into their thorns. I mapped out the details, my handwriting steady despite the hour. Tomorrow, I'd wake early before Brandon's alarm buzzed at 6. I'd play the part he expected, fumbling vague, a shadow of myself, while I photographed his phone, secured the safe, and contacted Ray. The bank was another priority. Frank had insisted on backup accounts at smaller institutions, a paranoia I had once teased him for, but now thanked him for silently. I'd transfer funds, change access codes, ensure Brandon's greedy hands found nothing but dust. The house seemed to pulse, its walls warm under my touch as if approving my plan. But there was a risk, a shadow lurking in my calculations. Brandon was no fool. His lies were meticulous, his charm a weapon honed over years. If he suspected I was onto him, he'd escalate perhaps faster than I could counter. The memory of his voice, 6 months max, sent a chill through me, but also a spark of fury. He'd planned my death with the casualness of ordering coffee, but he didn't know the woman he was facing. I'd survived loss, raised a daughter, built a life with a man who saw through darkness. I wasn't just Margaret Walsh. I was Frank's legacy, a force Brandon couldn't comprehend. The lamp flickered again, casting a pattern on the wall that looked almost like a face, Frank's face, or perhaps my own, fierce and unyielding. I shook my head, dismissing it as exhaustion. But the house felt alive, its energy entwined with mine. I thought of the attic safe hidden behind a panel. Only I knew its contents, a secret even Sarah didn't suspect. Was it possible Brandon had found it? The thought gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. Doubt was his weapon, not mine. I'd check the safe tomorrow, ensure its secrets were safe, and use it as leverage if needed. As the first hint of dawn crept through the window, I folded the notepad and tucked it under my pillow next to Frank's badge. The house was silent now, but its presence lingered, a quiet ally in the battle ahead. I lay back, my mind clear despite the sleepless night. Brandon thought he was writing my story, casting me as the victim in his twisted script. But I was rewriting it line by line with a strength he'd never see coming. The roses swayed outside their thorns, glinting like promises, and I whispered to Frank, to the house, to myself, "He's not ready for me." The clock ticked toward morning, each second a step closer to my counterattack. Brandon would wake smug in his certainty, humming his infuriating tune as he sipped his coffee. But I'd be waiting my plan, a blade sharpened by years of love and loss. The house creaked softly as if sealing our pact, and I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to gather the strength I'd need. The storm was coming, and Brandon was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a woman who's already survived the worst. The first light of dawn crept through the curtains, painting my bedroom in shades of gray and gold. But it did little to warm the chill in my bones. The house was silent, save for the faint creak of its timbers, as if it held its breath alongside me. I, Margaret Walsh, had barely slept my mind, a whirlwind of Brandon's chilling words from the night before: commitment, hearing power of attorney, 6 months max. His plan to lock me away and erase me was no longer a suspicion, but a truth carved in stone, and I had less than 36 hours to dismantle it. The roses outside my window swayed their thorns, glinting like promises in the early light, and I felt Frank's presence, his detective's instinct guiding me. Brandon thought he was the hunter, but today I'd turn his arrogance against him. I rose from the bed, my movements deliberate despite the weight of exhaustion. Frank's old police badge gleamed on the nightstand, a talisman of the strength he'd instilled in me. The house seemed to hum softly, its shadows pooling like allies in the corners, urging me to act. My plan, scrawled in the dead of night on Frank's yellowed notepad, was clear. Gather evidence, secure my assets, and contact Ray Collins, Frank's former partner. Brandon's phone was my first target, a vault of secrets left carelessly on the kitchen counter each morning during his narcissistic routine. His passcode, 0824, his birthday, was a gift of his ego, and I'd use it to unravel his conspiracy. I dressed quickly, choosing a loose cardigan and slippers to maintain the facade of the frail widow Brandon expected. The mirror reflected a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but beneath the surface burned a fire he'd never see coming. The house creaked as I stepped into the hallway, the sound almost encouraging, as if it knew the battle ahead. Downstairs, the kitchen was dark, the air heavy with the scent of last night's coffee. Brandon's phone sat on the counter, charging its screen a black mirror, waiting to betray him. I glanced at the clock, 5:45 a.m. His alarm would buzz in 15 minutes, followed by coffee news and his 30-minute shower. My window was narrow, but it was enough. I moved silently, my heart pounding as I picked up the phone. The passcode 0824 unlocked it on the first try, and I stifled a bitter smile at Brandon's predictability. The call log was a goldmine, multiple late-night conversations with D. Peterson, the longest, at 3:12 a.m., just hours ago. My fingers trembled as I photographed each entry with my own phone, the faint click of the camera sounding louder than it should in the quiet house. The chandelier in the dining room flickered unprompted, casting jagged shadows across the walls, and I froze, half expecting Brandon to appear. But the house was still its silence, a shield. The text messages were worse, each one a dagger to my heart. A message from 3 weeks ago read, "Package delivered as promised. She'll be confused within 72 hours." The response from Peterson, perfect timing. "Sarah's working doubles won't notice the changes." My breath caught rage and fear warring within me. They'd been drugging me, mixing something with my medication to amplify the fog, to make Sarah believe I was declining. Another exchange dated last week laid out the plan in stark detail. Commitment papers filed under emergency provisions. Judge Morrison's sympathetic to elder abuse cases. Excellent work. The reply. Once she's declared incompetent, how quickly can we move on the other matter? Patience. 6 months, max, natural causes, no suspicion. I photographed every message my hands steady, despite the fury burning in my chest. Frank's voice echoed in my mind. Anger is energy, Maggie. Direct it. I did, channeling it into precision, capturing every damning word. The house seemed to approve, a faint hum vibrating through the floorboards, as if it were storing my evidence in its walls. I returned the phone to its exact position, ensuring no trace of my intrusion remained. The clock read 5:58 a.m. Brandon's alarm would sound any moment, and I needed to be upstairs playing the part he'd written for me. But evidence was only half the battle. My assets, Frank's, and my nest egg, the $2.3 million life insurance policy, the house were Brandon's true target, and I had to protect them. Frank had been paranoid, bless him, insisting on backup accounts at smaller banks, their details hidden in a locked box in the attic safe only I knew about. Brandon might have sniffed out the study safe, but the attic was my secret, a fortress he couldn't breach. I crept to the study, the door creaking softly as I entered. The safe was untouched, its lock intact, but I couldn't shake the memory of Brandon's silhouette lingering here last night. The house groaned a low warning, and I decided to check the attic later when Brandon was in the shower. I returned to my room just as his alarm buzzed through the wall, a shrill reminder of the ticking clock. I sat on the bed, my heart racing, and reviewed my plan. The bank was my next stop. I'd transfer funds, change access codes, and set up automatic payments to keep my finances secure, even if Brandon succeeded in his hearing. But I needed Ray Collins Frank's old partner to turn evidence into action. Ray was a bulldog 72, but sharp as a blade with a network of contacts from his days on the force. He'd know how to handle Peterson, maybe even Judge Morrison, whose name in Brandon's texts gnawed at me. Was she complicit, or just another pawn? The house pulsed, the lamp flickering as if nudging me toward Ray. I pulled out my phone, hidden beneath a stack of books, and typed a quick message. Ray, it's Maggie. I need you. Family emergency. Meet me at the old coffee shop, 9 a.m. I hesitated, then added, bring your badge. Ray wouldn't need it, but it was a signal, a nod to Frank to the battles they'd fought together. I hit send, the faint whoosh of the message echoing in the quiet room. The roses outside swayed their petals, catching the dawn's light, and I felt a surge of strength as if Frank's spirit was woven into their thorns. Brandon's footsteps echoed downstairs, followed by the hiss of his coffee machine. I slipped into my role, shuffling to the kitchen with a vague expression, my cardigan slightly askew. Morning, Margaret. He said, his smile as false as ever, his eyes scanning me for signs of weakness. How are you feeling? Any confusion today? His voice was syrupy, but I caught the edge, a predator testing his prey. Oh, you know, I replied, letting my voice waver. Some days are better than others. I fumbled with my teacup, spilling a drop for effect, and his smile widened, satisfied. The chandelier flickered again, and I hid my smirk. Keep smiling, Brandon. It won't last. Sarah rushed through, grabbing a granola bar, her scrubs wrinkled from another sleepless night. I'm late, she said, kissing my cheek. Brandon, keep an eye on Mom, okay? Of course, darling, he replied, his arm sliding around her waist with practiced affection. We'll have a quiet day, won't we, Margaret? I nodded, my eyes downcast, playing the part perfectly. The moment Sarah's car pulled away, Brandon's warmth vanished, his gaze cold and calculating. We need to talk about your future, he said, settling at the table with a glossy brochure for Sunset Manor. Sarah and I think it's time for professional care. I picked up the brochure, my hands trembling for show. It looks expensive, I said, my voice small. Don't worry, he replied, his tone oily. Your insurance will cover it, and we'll handle the rest. The house groaned, a low protest, and I felt its strength bolstering mine. I excused myself, claiming fatigue, and retreated to my room, my heart pounding with purpose. By 7:30 a.m., Brandon was in the shower, his podcasts droning through the bathroom door. I moved quickly, slipping into the study to check the safe. It was secure, but I memorized its lock's click, ensuring I'd know if it was tampered with. Then I climbed to the attic, the ladder creaking under my weight. The hidden safe, concealed behind a panel, was untouched. Its contents, account details, Frank's old case files, a letter he'd written to me, safe. I took the account details, tucking them into my purse, and whispered a thank you to Frank to the house. At 8:45 a.m., I left for the bank dressed in my usual cardigan to avoid suspicion. The First National Bank, where Frank and I had kept our primary accounts, was bustling, but the manager, an old friend, expedited my requests. I transferred funds to backup accounts, changed access codes, and set up automatic payments, ensuring Brandon's hands would find nothing. The house's energy seemed to follow me, a faint hum in my ears, as I worked as if it approved. By 9:00 a.m., I was at the coffee shop, my heart racing as Ray Collins walked in, his eyes sharp despite his age. Maggie, he said, his voice gruff. You look like hell. What's wrong? I laid out the evidence photos of Brandon's texts, the call logs, his plan with Peterson. Ray's expression darkened, his hand tightening around his coffee mug. Frank would have torn this bastard apart, he said. Let's make sure you do. The house, the roses. Frank's badge, they were all with me, guiding my every step. Brandon thought he'd won, but I was rewriting his story, and by Thursday he'd face a truth he couldn't escape. The coffee shop smelled of burnt espresso and nostalgia. Its worn booths and flickering neon sign, a relic of the days when Frank and I would sit here laughing over his stories of the precinct. Now, at 9:00 a.m., I sat in the corner, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug, the steam curling like a ghost. The weight of Brandon's plot, his plan to have me committed, steal my fortune, and erase me, pressed against my chest. But I, Margaret Walsh, was no longer just a widow in a cardigan. I was a storm-gathering strength. And the house with its creaking timbers and whispering roses had led me here to Ray Collins, the one man who could help me turn Brandon's trap against him. The bell above the door jingled, and Ray walked in, his broad shoulders stooped, but his eyes sharp as ever at 72. His gray hair was cropped close, his face etched with lines from years of chasing shadows with Frank. He spotted me immediately, his gaze cutting through the morning crowd like a blade. Maggie Walsh, he said, sliding into the booth across from me, his voice gruff but warm. You look like you've seen a ghost. What's the emergency? The house's energy seemed to follow me, a faint hum in my ears, as if its walls were watching, waiting for my next move. I leaned forward, my voice low, the weight of the truth heavy on my tongue. Ray, someone's trying to kill me, and I need your help to stop them. His expression didn't change, but his posture shifted, the old detective snapping to attention. He sipped his black coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. Tell me everything from the beginning, he said, his tone all business, the same tone Frank used when a case turned deadly. I laid it out, piece by damning piece, my voice steady despite the storm inside. I told him about the medication the fog had cast over my mind and Brandon's campaign of lies, claiming I left the stove on, wandered at night, lost my glasses. I described the night I overheard his phone call, his chilling plan to have me declared incompetent. seize my $2.3 million life insurance and savings, and ensure my tragic death within 6 months. I slid my phone across the table, showing him the photos of Brandon's texts with Dr. Peterson, the call logs, the words that burned like acid package delivered. She'll be confused within 72 hours. Ray's jaw tightened, his fingers scrolling through the evidence with the precision of a man who'd seen too many betrayals. Son of a bitch. He muttered, his voice low but laced with fury. Frank would have had this bastard in cuffs by now. He handed the phone back, his eyes blazing. Brandon's playing a dangerous game, Maggie, but he's not as smart as he thinks. You've got him dead to rights with this. The coffee shop's lights flickered a brief pulse that made the waitress glance up, confused. I felt the house's presence, its shadows stretching across town to bolster me. Frank's not here, I said quietly, but I am, and I'm not going down without a fight. Ray grinned, a wolfish smile that reminded me of Frank in his prime. That's the Maggie I know. What do you need from me? I took a breath. The plan I'd scrawled in the dead of night unfolding like a map. I need Brandon caught red-handed with evidence no one can ignore. But more than that, I need Sarah to see the truth about the man she married. She's too deep in his lies, Ray. She thinks I'm declining, and it's breaking her heart. Ray nodded, his fingers tapping the table, already working the angles. Sarah's the key, he said. If we can get her to the hearing with this evidence, she'll see him for what he is. But we need to move fast Thursdays tomorrow, and Peterson's evaluation will carry weight unless we discredit him first. He paused, his eyes narrowing. This Dr. Peterson, any chance he's got a history of bending the rules? I thought of the texts, Peterson's casual agreement to falsify my evaluation, and a memory surfaced Frank mentioning a medical school scandal years ago, a doctor caught forging records. Maybe I said my voice firm. Brandon said Peterson owes him from med school. There might be something there. Ray's grin widened. Good. I've still got contacts in the medical board. I'll dig into Peterson's past, see what skeletons he's hiding. The coffee shop's lights flickered again, and I felt a chill not from the air but from a certainty deep in my bones. The house was with me, its energy pulsing through the roses, through Frank's badge in my purse, through the plan taking shape. There's something else, I said, lowering my voice. Brandon mentioned Judge Morrison. Said she's sympathetic to elder abuse cases. Do you think she's in on it? Ray's expression darkened, his fingers stilling on the table. Morrison was Frank's friend, he said. She's tough, but fair. If Brandon's counting on her, he's either got leverage or he's misjudged her. I'll make a call, see where she stands. The house's hum grew stronger, a vibration I felt in my chest as if it were guiding me toward Morrison. Frank had trusted her, worked with her on cases that broke his heart and hers. If she was clean, she could be our ace. If not, we'd need another way to stop the hearing. I leaned closer, my voice urgent. We need to set a trap, Ray. Brandon's expecting me to walk into that hearing defenseless, confused. Let's give him what he wants, a frail old woman, then hit him with everything we've got. Ray's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the hunt. I like it. We'll use his routine against him. You said he's predictable coffee news shower. What's his next move today? I thought back to his habits, the way he checked his phone obsessively, his meetings with clients that always seemed to happen when Sarah was at work. He's got errands this morning, I said. Said he'll be back by lunch. That gives me a window to check the attic safe, make sure he hasn't found it. Ray raised an eyebrow. Attic safe. I nodded, my voice low. Frank's idea. A backup hidden behind a panel, account details, some of his old case files. A letter he wrote me. Brandon doesn't know it exists, but I caught him near the study safe last night. I need to be sure. Ray's expression softened, a rare glimpse of the man who'd stood by Frank's side. Frank always had a plan B, he said. Sounds like you do too. The coffee shop's windows rattled a sudden gust outside, making the roses in the planter sway, their petals catching the light like tiny beacons. I felt Frank's presence, his strength woven into the plan, into the house, into me. We need to catch him at the hearing, I said. You, me, the evidence, and Sarah. She has to see it herself, or she'll never believe it. Ray nodded, pulling out a small notebook, his handwriting as precise as Frank's. I'll get the evidence to my contact at the precinct, set up surveillance for tomorrow. We'll need recording equipment, maybe a couple of uniforms to make it official. And I'll call Morrison's clerk, feel out her position. I slid the phone back into my purse next to Frank's badge, its weight a reminder of the battles we'd fought together. Ray, this has to work, I said, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with resolve. Sarah's all I have left. I can't let him take her too. Ray reached across the table, his hand rough but steady over mine. He won't, Maggie. You're Frank's wife, and that makes you tougher than any bastard like Brandon. We'll nail him. The coffee shop's lights flickered again, and the waitress muttered about faulty wiring, but I knew better. The house was with me, its energy stretching across town, its shadows aligning with my purpose. I thought of the roses, their thorns sharp as my determination, and the attic safe a secret Brandon couldn't touch. As we left the coffee shop, Ray promising to make calls, I felt a surge of strength, as if Frank's spirit was walking beside me. The plan was in motion, and Brandon's arrogance would be his downfall. Back home, I slipped into my role, shuffling through the kitchen as Brandon returned from his errands, his smile as false as ever. Feeling okay, Margaret, he asked, his eyes scanning me for weakness. Just tired, I replied, letting my voice waver, my hands fumbling with a spoon. He nodded, satisfied, and headed upstairs, humming his infuriating tune. The house creaked a low warning, and I smiled. Tomorrow I'd be ready, and Brandon would learn what happens when you underestimate a woman forged by love and loss. The morning of the commitment hearing dawned with a chill that seeped into my bones, as if the house itself were bracing for battle. I stood at my bedroom window, my breath fogging the glass, watching the roses in the backyard sway in a breeze that felt alive, their thorns glinting like daggers in the pale light. I, Margaret Walsh, had spent the last 36 hours weaving a trap for Brandon, my son-in-law, whose plan to lock me away, steal my fortune, and erase me had ignited a fire within me. Today, in a courtroom filled with his lies, I'd spring that trap guided by Frank's memory, Ray's loyalty, and the house's uncanny whispers. The clock read 6:00 a.m., and the game was about to begin. The house creaked softly, its timbers settling as if in agreement. As I dressed in my usual cardigan and slippers, the costume of the frail widow Brandon expected. But beneath the facade, my heart was a war drum, my mind sharp as the blade Frank had taught me to wield. Ray Collins, his old partner, had spent the previous day mobilizing his contacts, arranging for 2 detectives, Morrison and Patterson, and recording equipment to be at the courthouse. My phone, hidden in my purse next to Frank's badge, held the damning evidence photos of Brandon's texts, with Dr. Peterson call logs and a plan so cold it could freeze the sun. The hearing was set for 10:00 a.m., and Sarah, my daughter, would be there, her trust in Brandon, a chain I had to break. I moved it downstairs, my steps deliberately slow as Brandon emerged from his bedroom, his suit pristine, his smile a mask of false concern. "Ready for today, Margaret?" he asked, his voice smooth as oil, his eyes scanning me for cracks. "It's for your safety, you know." The chandelier flickered unprompted, casting jagged shadows across the kitchen, and I hid a smile. "I suppose so," I replied, letting my voice tremble, my hands fumbling with a teacup. He nodded satisfied and turned to his coffee machine, humming his infuriating tune. The house groaned a low warning, and I felt its strength bolstering mine. Sarah rushed through her nurse's scrubs, wrinkled her face pale with exhaustion and worry. "Mom." "I'll be at the hearing," she said, her voice breaking as she squeezed my hand. "I just want you to be safe." Her eyes, so like Frank's, were clouded with guilt, and I ached to tell her the truth. But not yet. She needed to see it for herself, or Brandon's grip on her would never loosen. "I know, sweetheart," I said softly, playing my part. Brandon's arm slid around her waist, his smile a predator's grin. "We'll take care of everything, darling," he said, and the house creaked again, as if urging me to act. As Sarah left for the hospital, promising to meet us at the courthouse, I retreated to my room, my heart pounding. Ray had texted at dawn. "Everything's set. Morrison and Patterson are ready, recording gear in place. Stay sharp, Maggie." I checked my purse. Frank's badge, the phone with the evidence, a small notebook with my plan, and felt a surge of resolve. The roses outside swayed their petals, catching the light like beacons, and I whispered to Frank to the house, "This is it." The air grew heavy, the shadows pooling like allies, and I knew I wasn't alone. At 7:30 a.m., Brandon's shower started his podcasts droning through the bathroom door. This was my moment. I slipped into the study, checking the safe one last time, still secure, its contents untouched. Then I climbed to the attic, the ladder creaking under my weight, and opened the hidden safe. Inside were the account details, Frank's case files, and his letter, its words, a lifeline. "Maggie, you're tougher than any storm. Trust yourself." I tucked the letter into my purse, its weight grounding me, and secured the safe. The house hummed a vibration that pulsed through my veins as if sealing our pact. By 9:00 a.m., we were in Brandon's car, heading to the courthouse. He drove with the confidence of a man who'd already won, his hands relaxed on the wheel, his voice dripping with false empathy. "This is for the best, Margaret," he said, glancing at me in the rear-view mirror. "Sunset Manor will keep you safe." I nodded, my eyes downcast. My hands folded in my lap, but inside I was a coiled spring. The rose's thorns flashed in my mind, sharp and unyielding, and I felt the house's presence, its energy stretching across town to guide me. The courthouse was a gray monolith, its halls echoing with the weight of justice. Ray was waiting outside his eyes, sharp, his old badge clipped to his belt like a challenge. He nodded subtly, and I spotted Detectives Morrison and Patterson nearby, their plain clothes blending with the crowd, but their presence unmistakable. Sarah arrived, her face drawn, her hands clutching a tissue. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered, hugging me tightly. I squeezed her back, my heart aching. "It'll be okay." "Sweetheart," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Brandon's hand rested on her shoulder, his smile a mask, but I caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. Good. Let him feel it. The hearing room was stark, its wooden benches worn, its air heavy with anticipation. Judge Morrison, a stern woman with gray hair and piercing eyes, sat at the bench, her reputation for fairness a flicker of hope. Dr. Peterson was there, his suit ill-fitting, his hands fidgeting with a file labeled Margaret Walsh, Psychiatric Evaluation. My stomach churned as I saw the lies inked on those pages, but I kept my expression vague. My shoulders slumped, playing the part Brandon had written. The house's energy pulsed in my chest, a reminder that I held the truth. Ray slipped into the room, taking a seat near the back, his notebook open, his pen ready. Morrison and Patterson stood near the door, their recording devices hidden but active. Brandon sat beside Sarah, his arm around her, his face a portrait of concern. "All rise," the bailiff called, and the hearing began. Judge Morrison's voice was crisp as she outlined the purpose to determine if I, Margaret Walsh, posed a danger to myself or others, requiring involuntary commitment. Peterson stood, his voice smooth, as he presented his evaluation, claiming I suffered from severe cognitive decline, supported by Brandon's observations of my supposed incidents. I listened, my heart pounding, as Peterson lied with the ease of a man who'd done it before. Sarah's hand trembled in mine, her eyes wet with tears. Brandon leaned forward, his expression grave, but I saw the glint of triumph in his eyes. He thought he'd won. Then Ray stood, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Your Honor, I request permission to present evidence on behalf of Mrs. Walsh," he said, his tone commanding. Morrison's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Collins." Ray approached, handing her a folder with copies of the photos, Brandon's texts, call logs, the damning words, 6 months, max, natural causes. The room grew still, the air heavy, as if the house itself had followed me here. Morrison's face hardened as she read, her gaze flicking to Brandon, who shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Walsh," she said, her voice sharp, "can you explain these communications with Dr. Peterson?" Brandon's smile faltered, his hands clenching. "Those are out of context, Your Honor," he stammered. "I was discussing Margaret's care, nothing more." I stood, my voice steady, my cardigan falling away like armor shed for battle. "Your Honor, my son-in-law planned to have me committed to steal my assets and ensure my death within 6 months. Those texts prove it." Sarah gasped, her hand covering her mouth as I handed my phone to Ray, who displayed the evidence on a projector. The texts glowed on the screen, each word a nail in Brandon's coffin package delivered. "She'll be confused within 72 hours. Peterson paled, his file slipping to the floor while Brandon's face drained of color. Sarah stood, her voice trembling but fierce. "Brandon, is this true?" she demanded, her eyes searching his. He opened his mouth, his charm crumbling, but no words came. The house's hum vibrated in my chest, and I felt Frank's presence, his strength guiding me. "Sarah, he used you," I said softly, my hand on her arm. "He drugged me, lied to you, planned to kill me. But I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere." Morrison banged her gavel, her voice thunderous. "Mr. Walsh, Dr. Peterson, you are both under arrest pending investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder." Morrison and Patterson moved forward, cuffs ready, as Brandon lunged to his feet, his voice desperate. "This is a misunderstanding." Margaret's confused. "She's manipulating everyone." But Sarah turned away, her face a mask of betrayal, and I knew I'd reached her. The roses flashed in my mind, their thorns sharp as justice, and the house's energy surged, the courtroom lights flickering as if in celebration. Brandon was led away, his protests echoing while Peterson followed, his head bowed. Sarah collapsed into my arms, sobbing, and I held her, my heart breaking and healing all at once. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I should have seen it." I stroked her hair, my voice steady. "You're here now, sweetheart. That's what matters." Ray approached, his grin fierce. "Frank would be proud, Maggie." He set his hand on my shoulder. Judge Morrison descended from the bench, her eyes softening. "Margaret, I knew Frank well. He'd have trusted you to do this, and you didn't let him down." The house's hum faded, its work done, and I felt Frank's badge in my purse, a quiet reminder of the strength we'd shared. As we left the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, warming my face. The roses, the house. Frank, they'd all been with me, guiding me through the storm. Brandon's trap had failed, and I stood tall, a woman forged by love and loss, ready to rebuild with Sarah by my side. The courthouse hallway echoed with the clatter of footsteps and muffled voices. But to me, it was as if the world had fallen silent, save for the ragged sound of Sarah's sobs against my shoulder. I, Margaret Walsh, stood in the aftermath of Brandon's unmasking, my arms wrapped around my daughter as she trembled, her tears soaking through my cardigan. The courtroom behind us was still its air heavy with the weight of justice delivered, but the victory felt hollow in the face of Sarah's pain. Brandon's chilling plan to drug me, lock me away, steal our fortune, and ensure my death had been laid bare, his texts and call logs projected for all to see. Yet it was Sarah, my sweet, trusting daughter, who bore the deepest wound, her world shattered by the man she'd loved. The house's energy, that strange hum that had guided me through this battle, lingered in my chest, a quiet reassurance as I held Sarah. The roses in our backyard flashed in my mind, their thorns sharp as the truth, their petals soft as the hope I clung to. Frank's badge, tucked in my purse, was a talisman of the strength he'd instilled in me, and I felt his presence now urging me to be the anchor Sarah needed. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, stroking her hair, though my own heart ached with the weight of her grief. "You're safe now. We're safe." Sarah pulled back, her eyes red and swollen. Her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a night shift that felt like a lifetime ago. "How could I not see it, Mom?" She choked out, her voice raw. "He lied to me, manipulated me, and I believed him. I thought you were slipping away." Her words cut deeper than any of Brandon's lies, not because they blamed me, but because they revealed the depth of her guilt. She'd been his pawn, her love for him twisted into a weapon, and now she stood in the wreckage, searching for solid ground. I took her hands, my grip steady despite the storm inside. "Sarah, he fooled us both for a while," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "But you're here now, and that's what matters. We'll get through this together." The hallway's fluorescent lights flickered a faint pulse that made a passing clerk glance up, confused. I felt the house's presence, its shadows stretching across town to bolster me as if it knew the battle wasn't over until Sarah was whole again. Ray Collins approached his broad frame, a reassuring shadow, his eyes soft with the grief of a man who'd seen too many families torn apart. "Maggie." "Sarah, let's get you both out of here," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "The detectives have Brandon and Peterson in custody. They're not going anywhere." Sarah flinched at Brandon's name, her hands tightening in mine, and I nodded to Ray. "Thank you," I said, my voice carrying the weight of years of trust. He tipped his head, his old badge glinting at his belt, and I felt Frank's spirit in that moment, a bridge between us all. We stepped outside, the autumn air, sharp against my skin, the sun breaking through clouds like a promise. Sarah was silent as we walked to Ray's car, her steps heavy, her gaze distant. I knew what was coming the moment she'd demand to see the evidence herself, to face the full scope of Brandon's betrayal. I dreaded it, not for myself, but for the pain it would bring her. The roses swayed in my mind, their petals a reminder of love's resilience, and I steeled myself for what lay ahead. At home, the old Victorian welcomed us with its familiar creaks, its stained glass windows casting colored patterns across the floor. Sarah paused in the doorway, her eyes scanning the living room as if seeing it for the first time. "This was supposed to be our home," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How did it become a lie?" I guided her to the couch, the same one where Frank and I had read bedtime stories to her as a child, and sat beside her, my purse on the coffee table. Frank's badge, a quiet sentinel. "Sarah, I need to show you something," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing with the photos I'd taken of Brandon's texts. Her hands trembled as she took it, her eyes scanning the words that had sealed his fate. Package delivered. She'll be confused within 72 hours. Her breath hitched, her fingers tightening on the phone. Commitment papers filed. 6 months, max natural causes, no suspicion. A sob escaped her, raw and wrenching, as she read the exchange with Dr. Peterson, each word a dagger to her heart. "He drugged you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He made me think you were." "Mom, I'm so sorry." She dropped the phone, her hands covering her face, and I pulled her close, my own tears threatening to spill. "You didn't know, sweetheart," I said, my voice fierce with love. "He used your trust, your exhaustion, your love for me. But you're not to blame." The chandelier flickered, casting a warm glow across the room, and I felt the house's energy, its walls holding us like a mother's embrace. Sarah pulled back, her eyes blazing with a mix of grief and anger. "How could he do this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I trusted him." "Mom, I loved him. And he was planning to kill you." The word hung in the air, heavy and final, and I saw the moment her heart broke, the pieces falling like shattered glass. But beneath the pain, I saw something else, a spark of the strength she'd inherited from Frank, from me. "I want to see him," she said suddenly, her voice hard. "I need to hear it from him." I hesitated, my instinct to protect her warring with the knowledge that she needed closure. Ray, standing by the door, nodded slightly, his eyes meeting mine. "They're holding him at the precinct," he said. "I can arrange it, but it won't be easy, Sarah." She straightened, her jaw set. "I need to do this," she said, her voice steady now, a fire kindling within her. I felt a surge of pride tinged with sorrow and nodded. "Then we'll go together." The precinct was a maze of fluorescent lights and echoing voices, its air thick with the scent of coffee and paperwork. Ray led us to an interrogation room where Brandon sat, his suit rumpled, his hands cuffed to the table. His charm was gone, replaced by a desperate edge, his eyes darting as we entered. Sarah stopped in the doorway, her breath catching, and I squeezed her hand, the house's hum pulsing in my chest, grounding me. Sarah Brandon said, his voice smooth despite the cuffs. "This is all a misunderstanding." "Your mother's confused, manipulating things." Sarah cut him off, her voice like steel. "Don't lie to me anymore," she said, stepping forward, my phone in her hand. "I read your texts, Brandon. You drugged my mother. You planned to lock her away, to kill her." Her voice broke on the last word, but she held his gaze, unyielding. Brandon's face twisted, a flicker of the predator beneath. "You don't understand," he said, leaning forward. "I was trying to protect us, to secure our future. Your mother's not well, Sarah. You saw her forgetting things, wandering." I stepped forward, my voice calm but cutting. "Enough, Brandon. You thought I was weak, but you were wrong, and now everyone knows it." The room's lights flickered a brief pulse that made Brandon flinch, and I felt the house's presence, its shadows aligning with my words. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "You used me," she said, her words a quiet indictment. "You made me doubt my own mother, my own instincts." "We're done, Brandon. I'm filing for divorce as soon as I leave this room." His face crumpled, not with remorse, but with the realization that his game was over. He lunged against the cuffs, his voice rising. "You'll regret this." "Sarah, you need me." But she turned away, her shoulders squared, and I knew she was reclaiming herself. Detective Morrison entered, his expression grim. "Brandon Walsh, you're charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, and elder abuse," he said, reading from a file. "Dr. Peterson's already talking, trying to cut a deal. You're not walking away from this. Brandon slumped, his charm shattered as they led him away. Sarah watched her face a mask of pain and resolve, and I pulled her close, the house's hum fading to a soft warmth. Back home, the Victorian wrapped us in its familiar embrace, its creaks softer now, as if at peace. Sarah sat on the couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her eyes distant but clear. "I should have listened to you," she said, her voice quiet. "You tried to tell me, and I didn't see it." I sat beside her, my hand on hers. "You were working yourself to death, Sarah." He preyed on that. "But you're stronger than you know, and you proved it today." The roses outside swayed their petals, glowing in the twilight, and I felt Frank's presence, his love woven into the house, into us. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice small but steady. "We heal," I said simply. "We rebuild together." The chandelier flickered a final pulse of light, and I smiled, knowing the house was with us, its secrets safe, its strength ours. The old Victorian house felt different now, its creaking timber softer, as if exhaling a long-held breath. The roses in the backyard glowed in the late afternoon sun, their petals catching the light like tiny lanterns, their thorns no longer bristling with warning, but standing sentinel in quiet victory. I, Margaret Walsh, stood at the kitchen window, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea, the warmth grounding me after the storm of the past days. The courtroom confrontation had shattered Brandon's plot to have me committed steal our fortune and erase me, but it had left scars on Sarah, on our home, on my heart. Yet, as the house hummed gently, its shadows pooling like old friends, I felt Frank's presence, his strength woven into the walls, guiding us toward healing. The days following the hearing were a blur of legal proceedings and raw emotion. Brandon and Peterson, his accomplice, were detained at the precinct, their faces stripped of the charm and arrogance that had carried them so far. Ray Collins, Frank's old partner, was a bulldog, working tirelessly with Detectives Morrison and Patterson to ensure the evidence, those damning texts and call logs, was airtight. I sat with Sarah in the living room, the same couch where we'd read bedtime stories years ago, and watched her grapple with the truth. Her eyes, once clouded with exhaustion and trust in Brandon, were clear now, but heavy with grief. "Mom," she said one evening, her voice trembling as she clutched a photo of us from her childhood, "how did I let him fool me?" The chandelier flickered a faint pulse of light, and I felt the house's warmth as if it were comforting her, too. I took her hand, my grip steady. "He was a master at it, Sarah," I said softly. "He used your love, your exhaustion, your trust. But you saw through it in the end, and that's what counts." She nodded, tears spilling, and I pulled her close, the house's hum a quiet lullaby. The legal wheels turned swiftly thanks to Ray's connections and Judge Morrison's resolve. Morrison, who'd known Frank from his detective days, took the case personally, her stern face softening when she spoke of him. Frank Walsh was a good man, she told me after the hearing, her eyes meeting mine. "He'd be proud of you, Margaret." Her words were a balm, a reminder of the strength Frank had instilled in me, and I felt the house's energy, its shadows aligning like a nod of agreement. Brandon's trial was expedited, the evidence overwhelming. The texts I'd photographed, package delivered. "She'll be confused" within 72 hours were presented alongside Peterson's confession, extracted under pressure from prosecutors. Peterson, desperate to save himself, admitted to supplying drugs to amplify my medication's side effects, falsifying my evaluation, and colluding with Brandon to declare me incompetent. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation, as the prosecutor laid out the charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, and elder abuse. Brandon sat his suit rumpled, his charm gone, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Sarah insisted on attending her jaw set, her hands clenched in her lap. I sat beside her, Frank's badge in my purse, a quiet anchor. When the prosecutor projected Brandon's texts, Sarah's breath hitched her hand, finding mine. 6 months, max, natural causes, no suspicion. The prosecutor read aloud, and the courtroom gasped the words, a chilling echo of Brandon's cruelty. Sarah's tears fell silently, but her grip on my hand was fierce, a sign of the strength awakening within her. The verdict came swiftly, 30 years without parole for Brandon, a sentence that felt like justice but couldn't erase the pain. Peterson received 15 years, his medical license revoked, his career a ruin. As the gavel fell, the courtroom lights flickered a brief pulse that made the bailiff glance up, confused. I smiled, feeling the house's presence, its roses swaying in my mind, their thorns glinting in victory. Brandon's head bowed his defeat final, and I whispered to Frank wherever he was, we did it. Sarah's healing was slower, a journey through guilt and betrayal. She filed for divorce the day after the hearing, her signature steady, despite the tears in her eyes. I can't believe I let him into our lives, she said one night, sitting on the porch as the roses glowed in the twilight. I joined her, the air cool against my skin, the house's hum, a soft reassurance. You loved him, Sarah, I said. That's not a weakness, it's a strength. He betrayed it. But you're still here, and so am I. She started therapy, recommended by a colleague at the hospital, a quiet woman who understood the scars of manipulation. I went with her for the first session, sitting in the waiting room, Frank's badge in my hand, its weight a reminder of our resilience. Sarah emerged, her eyes red but clearer, and hugged me tightly. I'm learning to trust myself again, she said, her voice small but growing stronger. The house creaked as we returned home, its timbers settling like a sigh of relief, and I knew we were on the path to healing. The media caught wind of the story headlines, splashing across local papers. Widow Foyle's son-in-law's murder plot. Letters poured in from strangers who'd faced similar betrayals, from seniors, warning others to stay vigilant. I read them in the kitchen, the roses outside, nodding in approval, and felt a sense of purpose. Sarah and I spoke at a community center, sharing our story to raise awareness about elder abuse, our voices steady despite the weight of memory. The house's energy pulsed, its shadows warm, as if proud of our fight. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the chandelier casting soft light across the walls, Sarah turned to me, a photo album open on her lap. I found this in the attic, she said, her fingers tracing a picture of Frank, Sarah, and me laughing under the willow tree. I forgot how happy we were. I smiled, my heart aching with love. We can be again, I said. And the house hummed, its roses swaying outside their petals, a promise of new beginnings. The attic safe, untouched by Brandon, held more than account details. It held Frank's letter, a final gift I shared with Sarah. Maggie, Sarah, you're my everything, he'd written. No storm can break you, not while you have each other. We read it together, tears falling, and the house seemed to wrap us in its embrace, its creaks a lullaby of peace. Sarah's hand found mine, her grip strong, and I knew we'd weathered the worst. The legal battles faded. The media moved on, but our home remained its walls, a testament to our survival. Sarah returned to work, her steps lighter, her smile returning. I tended the roses, their thorns, no longer a warning, but a symbol of our strength. The house, once a battleground, was a sanctuary. Again, its shadows soft, its hum, a quiet song of victory. I stood at the window, Frank's badge in my hand, and whispered, We're okay, Frank. The roses swayed, the house creaked, and I felt his love, our love, holding us together.